Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. I'm Josh Williams, and I'm joined by David Hughes as ever. Dave, how are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, mate. I hope you are as well.
Yeah, as always, we have another episode to get through this week, consisting of the request line that we started last week. Obviously, we didn't get through it. We never get through it in 1 week, usually, when it comes to this sort of thing. So we're going to restart with that, and we're going to speak about, obviously, Arsenal, who we face this weekend. Just before we do, I've been asked to flag that this week, next week. I know we have a fair few listeners in Dublin. So next week I will be in Dublin with Paul Gorst, the Liverpool Echo's Liverpool correspondent, for a Blood Red live event at a place called the Camden in Dublin. You can get tickets for it, and it's on the night that Liverpool play Porto in the Champions League. So yeah, do get tickets for that. Come down, you'll see me there, you'll see Paul there, and it's a bit of a Blood Red live night, basically live podcast and Q&A and things like that. So yeah, those in Dublin do get tickets. But Dave, in terms of our request line, then where will we up to, mate? You want to start?
I think we were about to look at Franck Kessie, who was flagged by Stephen Kinsella and David Williams, which is quite an interesting player because he's someone that I've written about recently. Well, I'll say recently, over the last 6 to 12 months, because he's been kind of doing so well for AC Milan. Liverpool fans would have. I'm trying to think. Did he play in the game against Liverpool? I can't remember.
I think he did. He showed up as quite good as well. I think he was one of their standout players, to be honest.
Yeah, well, we spoke a lot last week, didn't we, about Basuma? I guess the similarities between the two and how they play, position-wise, what they bring. Really kind of good, strong, mobile players. Guess he kind of got a lot of attention last season because he scored a fair few goals. I think he scored about 13, 14. But the huge caveat on that was he was Milan's penalty taker, and they had a fair few, which some would argue would be stat padding, but we're not going to get into that. But as an all round player, he's a good midfielder.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. I didn't know that. I've just looked at his numbers now. He scored 13, but 11 of them were pens.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so if you kind of just looked at those numbers as a flat, you thought, you've got this kind of, a bit more of a deep line midfielder, really good, strong midfielder who scores you loads of goals, perfect. But obviously, if you look a little bit deeper, you see that there's a big reason for that. Still a good player, though, very good player.
Yeah, he looks very, very well rounded to me, and I think one of the interesting things about him at the minute is obviously the fact that his contract expires in the summer. So I think there'll probably be a bit of a queue for him unless he signs a new deal at Milan. But yeah, very, very good player and very powerful, but also pretty skillful as well. Impressive when he's on the ball. Not particularly that dangerous with his passing, but yeah, plays a lot of football, available quite a lot, only 24 years old. As I said, very physical and strong and things like that in the centre of the park. And I think using FBref's similar players model, some of the similar players he's compared to, I do see it. His most comparable player, apparently, is over the course of the past year, is Adrien Rabiot. Used to play for PSG, now plays for Juventus. But I see it a little bit there, to be honest. Zambo Anguissa, who used to be a Fulham, now at Napoli, is there as well. I see it. I can see it with him a little bit. Players like Rakitic in there and Fede Valverde of Real Madrid and players like that. But yeah, I think Kessie will probably move this summer. And to be honest, based on his general skill set, I wouldn't be that surprised if it was to England, to be honest.
He gets linked a lot to Manchester United. I don't know if that one might come because they obviously need a profile like that. So, maybe he may end up there.
Yeah, do you think he's at all likely to be on Liverpool's radar? Do you think he's in that mould?
I expect to see some sorts of stories linking him to Liverpool with the, potential availability in the next 12 months. For me, though, probably not. Just because I actually think, it depends what happens to the contract, doesn't it? I suppose you could get him in for free, but I just feel like there'll be a lot of interest in him. A lot of clubs looking at him. Maybe they could be interested if he was going under the radar, but he's not. Probably cost a fair few quid in wages, if not transfer fee. I just feel like Liverpool will probably look for something a little bit more outside the box.
Yeah, so I've got 2 requests for Curtis Jones, and those are from Marcel Siwek and Tony Redden. I think he's an interesting one, Jones, to be honest, Dave, because I think generally in Liverpool fan base, judging by what I see and what I hear and things like that, he's quite 50-50 split in terms of whether people think he's good enough, whether people think he's going to make it, or whether people think he's just going to be another one of them players that Liverpool sells at Bournemouth. But for me, I'll be honest, I'm pretty convinced that he's absolutely fine. I'm pretty convinced that he's, I think he now is, but I think he's definitely going to be anyway at some point, Liverpool level. So, but I'm always quite surprised that the other week, I think it was last week, I got a quick taxi into town, and the taxi driver was speaking to me about the game. This was the day at Liverpool. I think we drew with Brighton, and he was at the game, the driver of the taxi, and he was just basically saying, Curtis Jones isn't good enough and stuff. And I was just quite surprised with it, really.
Yeah, I've heard similar things myself. I'd probably be more in your camp. I think he is. People forget he is only 20.
20.
And 20 years old. It's very young. And you wonder what the gauge is in terms of how people are measuring the player. Are they comparing it to his age group? And if so, he's literally top 0.1%. Fantastic. If you try to compare him to players who are, in the height of their best years, 27, 28, Liverpool's star players, then maybe at times he can look a little bit below that standard, but he's got so much more development to come. And I think what you've seen so far from him indicates that he can go on to be a top player. If you've spoke about FBref a few times. If someone wants to go and have a look at him on FBref now and just it kind of gives you an overview of where he's at against other players, and then obviously it also does the player comparison tool as well, which we've spoken about once or twice. But he's kind of like really maxing out every area. He's shown up really well, and admittedly, he hasn't had a ton of minutes on the pitch, so that'll influence that to an extent. But it still does kind of capture the stuff that he brings to the side, and he does a lot of good. He has a lot of good attacking influence on the Liverpool team when he does play.
Yeah, as you said, he's got like quite an attacking profile for a central midfielder, and I think he has got quite a specific profile. I think because he's been used at times as a wide forward because of his attacking nature, and I suppose his technical ability. He's got really good close control, likes to go on little dribbling runs and things like that. But he's also played quite regularly as a number 8. And I think at times maybe his decision making can be a little bit better. I think he can release the ball quicker in certain moments. I think when he's defensive, I think defensively his positioning can be a little bit better at times. But he's, as you said, he's 20. He's 20 years old, and if you think of some of Liverpool's current midfielders, in the squad at the minute when they were 20 years old, I mean, I doubt they were on Curtis's level, to be honest. When Fabinho was 20, he'd just been at Monaco for a year. He was playing fairly regularly, to be fair to him. I didn't expect that. He started 35 out of 38 League One matches as a 20-year-old Fabinho.
Pick another example quick.
Well, I think Henderson came to Liverpool when he was 20. And I think generally there's some comparisons that can be made between Henderson and Jones at that age. I think Jones is technically better than Henderson was at that age. Henderson's probably got a bit more of an engine. But I think just generally on Jones' level, I think he's going to be fine. I don't think there's anything to be concerned about. I think he's got a very, very high ceiling. And if you think of what he might be when he's 25, which is when Liverpool usually buy these types of players, he's got another 5 years of development before he reaches that stage. So I think Curtis Jones is fine.
Next, we've got from Joe Cavalier talking about Brendan Rodgers, which I think is quite interesting. Obviously, an ex-Liverpool manager. Just quickly, Josh, on Brendan Rodgers, what's the overview of him from people that you know, Liverpool supporters? How do people look back on that time and him as a manager?
I think again, it's not that dissimilar to Jones. I think you will generally get a split. You'll get people who thought he was very good, people who still like him now, and you'll get people who generally thought he was a bit of a kidder, really, a bit of someone who will take you for a ride a little bit and say things that weren't really true. I think there was general comparisons at the time between Rodgers and Roberto Martinez at Everton, because I think both were inclined to maybe exaggerate a little bit when they're talking about their own teams. But I think generally Rodgers is I think he's so different now compared to when he was at Liverpool. He arrived at Liverpool with this absolute perfect philosophy. Everything was about the ball. Everything was about possession. Signing little, very the opposite of physical players like Joe Allen and things like that to prove his point and things. And whereas I think now he's totally changed. He changes formation on a regular basis. He's absolutely willing to soak up pressure as part of a block and counter attack when he has to. He seems to have lost a bit of the ego attached to recruitment. In particular, I think he had conflict with Edwards when he was at Liverpool because he wanted to say over recruitment, and he was that famous summer where the committee bought, I think, Firmino, and Rodgers bought Benteke in the same summer, which is just obviously a mess. And since, I think Rodgers has he probably looked at what's happened since, Klopp and the recruitment, Salah and Van Dijk and Alisson. He's probably looked at that and thought, you know what, maybe I should have loosened my grip a little bit. So I think now, if Rodgers was to replace Klopp, for example, I think he'd probably do a really good job, actually. And I think he's now on a different level to when he was at Liverpool. He's obviously been linked with Manchester City and Manchester United recently, and I think City in particular would be a really good job for him.
Yeah, I think he's completely different now. But then, what I would say in his defence is he was about 39, I think, when he come in at Liverpool. Like, that's so young, isn't it? As a manager to go into a club like that. I think he did have an ego. I thought Liverpool, if we're being honest, were probably in a different place to what they are now. That kind of Liverpool of those few years remind me a little bit of what United have been over the last few years, and it's only say the last few years, specifically in the Klopp era, when Edwards and everything's kind of aligned, that Liverpool become what they are. But it wasn't like that when Rodgers was there initially, so it wasn't easy. And yeah, I think he did have a little bit of an ego. He did have this set philosophy, and I think he's learned a lot since. We done really well with Celtic, doing really well at Leicester. And I think what stands out as well is how he improves his team and individuals a lot. There's not really a reliance at Leicester on one or two just fantastic individuals that kind of made Leicester so competitive. He's built a really good side, a really good team. He's improved a lot of players. If you think of who's a good Harvey Barnes, maybe that's probably a good example. Harvey Barnes felt like he was kind of run the mill when he first broke through. Now he does really well. You could argue Vardy, although he's always been doing it, has kind of found a new level and fought off becoming a lot older, adjusted his game there. I think Maddison's, he had that thing with Maddison, didn't he, for a little while, where Maddison was out the side, and despite being a really good player, he wasn't playing, and that was to be stuff with off the pitch, and he's obviously dealt with that really well. Brought Maddison back in, he looks like a top talent again. So I think he's just improved a lot as a man manager as well, and I fully expect him to be in charge of one of the Manchester clubs over the next 2 years. Maybe I've got a feeling it might be United. I think United will go for him before City get there, because obviously they've got to wait for Guardiola to go. Whereas United probably going to have a more vacant place in the next 6 months.
Yeah, if I was him, I think I'd be a little bit concerned about that United job, to be honest. Because I think if you look at Rodgers' career, he's generally done very, very well when he's had a very good squad. When he had a very good squad at Liverpool for that particular season, Liverpool flew. Celtic obviously flew. Leicester, particularly when he first arrived, and they had Chilwell and Maguire and Vardy had it still closer to his peak, and all these players. Leicester flew. So I think generally he does well with a good squad. I'm not saying United have a bad squad, but they just generally over the years haven't looked anywhere near as competent when it comes to squad building compared to a Liverpool or a City or even a Leicester. So I think Rodgers would be majorly risking his reputation if he goes there, because I think out of all the top clubs, the prospect of failure is probably at its highest at United, just because of how they generally run. And I was going to ask you, Dave, do you think he's the best British coach?
Yeah, I'd say so. When you've asked that question, there's no one else who jumps in front of it. I think no, he is.
I would agree.
Certainly at this level at the moment, anyway, for sure.
Yeah, I would agree for what it's worth. Although I do think, I think Potter comes to mind as someone who's quietly closing the gap a little bit. But I don't think Potter will get properly recognised, and perhaps rightly so, until he gets maybe a job more in the spotlight and see how he copes. Obviously, Rodgers has kind of done that.
Yeah, I also think Potter probably still needs more consistent results with the performances and the improvements as well. And obviously, Rodgers got a trophy under his belt, didn't he, last season, which kind of feels like no one really remembers. And I kind of forgot it, but he did win the FA Cup, didn't he? Which that stuff does count for things. Whether it should or shouldn't is a different matter. But, at the end of the day, it's about winning trophies, isn't it? And he did do that.
Yeah, so next on the list from Daniel Salisbury is Antony of Ajax. I think we might have had a few names asked for him, actually. So if I've missed your name there, in addition to Daniel, I think that's my mistake, that actually. But interesting player, Dave. Have you seen him? Have you seen him play?
Yeah, I've seen Europe. I could try and pretend I watched loads of the Eredivisie, but look, I don't. I definitely monitor it because we write about a lot of players in the division, but I'm not going to pretend that I watch it week in, week out, because it's a tough league to follow TV wise. But yeah, I've seen him, and I can see why there's interest there. He's got really good records. Very young player. I think Liverpool perspective, maybe people are looking at it because he's that kind of player who plays on the right, but he's left-footed. Loves to cut in. Really good dribbler. Can score, can create. I wonder if people are thinking, is that the kind of Salah next profile, successor, that type of thing? But just from a general point of view, really good player, exciting player. Will probably be one of the top 5 European leagues soon. It just depends when and how soon. Because Ajax look really good this year. So I don't know if they'll get another year or two from him.
Yeah, he looks really, really good to me. I like the look of him. He's obviously still 21. And as you said, he's left-footed, which, we've flagged plenty of times in this podcast. That's just generally a very valuable pick, especially for the forward. But yeah, he looks really exciting. He looks very, very direct. Scored 9 Eredivisie goals last season with 8 assists, no penalties. So far this season, he's scored 3 in the Eredivisie. And usually when Ajax pick up a foreign talent, particularly from South America, they tends to be good reason behind that. Basically, obviously, Ajax are very focused on their own academy and things. So when they go and splash out on a kid from abroad, like a David Neres comes to mind as well. I know he hasn't particularly got his move in the past few years, but Antony looks another one of them, and he looks very quick, very skillful, technical, unpredictable. All those nice things that you want from a forward. And considering he's 21 years old, I do think he's definitely one to watch, and he does look like a Liverpool type player, high ceiling, and he's obviously learned to stay at the right club, really good club to come through at Ajax. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, like this summer and like that, because he's still contracted for another 4 years in Ajax. So I can't see any move anytime soon. But as a player that Liverpool will be, tracking, keeping a look on type thing, I think he's certainly going to be on there because he looks like a big prospect to me.
Yeah. I'm just whilst we were talking, I was just having a look because obviously he's a Brazilian international as well, isn't he? And he's playing for them, which helps. And I was just trying to see if I thought he was a little bit slight profile wise, because sometimes it does feel like that. It's such a lazy kind of thing to say about players coming from the Eredivisie because that's what so many people, label at them. But it sometimes is true. But I guess if you think about like a Jota type, Jota as a profile doesn't look like he'd be that imposing, but he is quite strong. And maybe we'd be looking at the same from him here.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose a way around that would be to look at generally how he gets on in the Champions League and in Europe.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So far this season, he's started all 4. In fact, no, has it been 4 or has it been 5? Well, he started 4 Champions League matches anyway for Ajax so far this season. Scored 1, assisted 5. Last season, he scored 1 in, again, 4 starts. So, but again, you have to probably watch the footage regarding that sort of thing. But yeah, that's generally, I suppose, one of the difficult things about picking up a player from the Dutch Eredivisie and bringing him straight to the Premier League. It's just you do have that doubt. And generally, I think if you look at the players who've came over the years, I mean, who has been a success? Has he been any?
Yeah, it's really hit and miss, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you've got Davy Klaassen. Did he come from
Yeah,
Ajax?
so that was Ajax's captain, kind
Yeah.
of leader. Took them all the way to the Europa League. Looked a fantastic player. Come to Everton, didn't really do it. And obviously, you can think, oh well, that's might not be in the right club for him, but he did have a few goals in Germany as well. I think he went to Werder Bremen. Didn't quite work out, and he's back at Ajax now.
Yeah. You also have Hakim Ziyech, who hasn't really kicked on at Chelsea, rumoured to leave in January. You have Sebastian Haller, who got brought to West Ham for about 40 million, I think, and he's now back in Holland. So, yeah, just generally, there's a bit of a question mark as to that sort of thing, but Antony does look very good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're next, Dave.
Yeah, well, I think Daniel Salisbury had one more, actually.
Yeah, he put in 2,
Yeah, Tchouameni at Monaco, midfielder. Is that who you got down, Josh?
Yeah, Tchouameni, yeah, I think is
Yeah, Tchouameni, sorry, Tchouameni.
Aurelien Tchouameni or something like
Yeah.
that, but he's a big
Yeah.
name, isn't he? He's on everyone's radar at the minute.
Yeah, if when you've probably come across it, Josh, when we're going day to day, he's getting linked to. It seems to be predominantly City at the moment. City seems to be the club who attracting the most attention with him, but I think any kind of top Premier League side's getting linked, and you can understand why. He's a top player. I'm trying to remember how old he is actually. 2 seconds.
He is 21.
21.
Funny enough, Dave, all the links I've seen are with United rather than City.
Oh, see, I mean, the best way to do this now is put them in on. See, if you put them in on Google now, latest stories. There's a City one, Chelsea, Madrid, and Newcastle.
Of course.
Yeah, but no, he's kind of that. I feel like we've come across a few similar midfield profile, although not carbon copies, but profiles of players who were quite dominant, both in the air and on the floor, good tacklers. I think he definitely comes under that.
Yeah, I was going to say then he specifically looks very, very good without the ball on the defensive side of the game. He looks like that kind of, that Hoover in like a whole midfield type area that just kind of like extinguishes fires. That type of player, while also obviously having plenty attached to his game. But he looks like he has generally similar skill set to a Declan Rice, maybe a Wilfred Ndidi. To a lesser extent, Fabinho. I think Fabinho's slightly different, but yeah, he does generally look like he's got bags of potential, and I think he's already representing France at international level. I think I might be saying that. Currently at AS Monaco, and he's so far of late, at least, playing fairly often. Obviously, he's still very, very young, but last season he started 36 out of their 38 league matches. So far this season, he started 11 times. So yeah, he looks like one who probably will get purchased for a big price, to be honest. But
I've got a question for you. Can you remember if Fabinho was playing in a double pivot when he was at Monaco?
yeah, he was. Yeah,
Yeah, because he's also playing in a double pivot. Because they tend to exclusively play like a 4-2-3-1. And I always just wonder how that adjusts to normally when you go into a top side, you're normally playing in that position as like a more holding on your own kind of number 6, aren't you? Although it might not always be even if there's two in midfield, you'll normally have one that does more of the defensive work. I assume he'd be doing more of that, and there's always just question marks about how that person copes going into that lone role when you're quickly in like a 2 normally, if that makes sense.
yeah. Well, it took a fair few months actually for Fabinho to learn the role, and initially I remember one specific early performance away at the Emirates. He just the space looked quite open, really, and it looked like Fabinho didn't really have the mobility to manage those open spaces. Where if you give Fabinho a smaller space to manage, he'll absolutely hoover everything up like it's easy. But I suppose you've got the same question mark attached to Declan Rice. Declan Rice is currently in the pivot, so there isn't many out there, to be honest. Them long defensive midfielders that have proven an ability to just sweep up everything, like Fernandinho was doing a few seasons back, for example. So yeah, we'll move on to Yusuf Hashishi's request. Apologies if I've just butchered your name, mate. He asks for Giorgio Chiellini. Bit of an alternative shout, that one, Dave.
Yeah, I'm just laughing at you apologising when really, you should be thankful that wasn't me who tried to do it because I'm terrible at them, mate. But yeah, strange one, because I guess with these kind of names that normally come up, we're kind of trying to shed a little bit of light in it, a few words on players that maybe people are just getting to know or don't know that much about. I think Chiellini is completely different, isn't he? Because he's a player that everyone knows about. He's arguably not the most fantastic player from a technical perspective, but he's got all that stuff that maybe some overlook, but we try not to. In terms of the mental attributes, he's definitely what you consider a leader. I think he's someone that if you're on the pitch, I imagine a lot of players turn to him. I think probably the something that stands out for me when we talk about him is what he did prior to the penalty shootouts against Spain. Was it in the Euros this year?
Yeah. In fact, no, it was against. Are you talking about the Saka moment where he pulled Saka back by his collar?
No, I'm talking about see if you remember it. So going into the penalty shootout to the side who progresses.
I know, yeah, I know.
Final, yeah. And he does this little thing where I think it was a Jordi Alba, where he kind of gives him a bit of a joke and slap down.
And an alpha moment.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah. So although that looks quite funny and light-hearted, I think that was a very clever thing that he did. Because it is a very kind of alpha. You wouldn't do that to someone that you felt really uncomfortable or intimidated by, would you? But just doing that action, it's kind of like I'm more comfortable than you. I'm like the alpha male here, and it's a little bit degrading, isn't it? Really, if we're being honest, it's a little bit degrading. And to do that ahead of a crunch penalty shootout against your opponent, only one team can progress. I think that they're just these little slight edges or moments that can play a part in the kind of outcome. And maybe give a little bit, if the players were paying attention, I don't know, but maybe give them a little bit of kind of impetus to follow suit and, have the big cojones, as they say.
Yeah, I think he's got that element about him, hasn't he? I suppose the elite competitor element to his game. Obviously he's doing something right because he's won the Serie A 8 times in his career so far. Still playing at a very good level at the age of 37. And he's left foot as well, which I didn't know, which is an interesting little quirk attached to his centre back. But I think, funny enough, just looking at his general game, his general skill set and things like that, it's hard it's hard not to focus on what he's like now because he's still playing. But I'm trying to think of even what he was like in his peak. I still think that if he came through now, I think the large majority of top sides would probably avoid him just because he's, as you said, he's not as elaborate on the ball. And I think pace-wise, he'd probably struggle if he was playing Liverpool's high line every week. So I think he's probably benefited from coming through in Serie A and what Serie A's been like over the years, playing at Juventus as part of a back five more often than not. But I think if he was coming through now, as I said, I think it'd be a little bit of a different game for him. Not to downplay his ability at all. I mean, his reading of the game, especially, is outstanding. And I can't hold candles to the man, to be honest. But yeah, it's just interesting how these legendary players, I'm sure he'll go down in history. It's interesting to consider. Okay, what will he be like now than in a modern game? Coming through playing for a Pep Guardiola or a Jurgen Klopp or the next in line.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one. Jonathan Tidecott, I think it is, and Tom Stewart talking about Jude Bellingham, which I don't know. I imagine there's probably a few that wanted to talk about him. But these are the two, obviously, we've got names in front of us. I mean, just an insane talent, to put it bluntly. And the weird thing is, sometimes you feel like these players can be hyped a little bit because obviously comes through really young age. He had that, it's still nonsense despite him being a fantastic player. He had that nonsense where Birmingham retired the squad number after him. And all that can kind of work against the player a little bit, but if you put it to one side, he's a player with the absolute full package. In terms of a midfield, he's just a fantastic passer, can dribble. He's really strong without the ball. And I think that the real crux of all this that makes him so fantastic is the fact he's still just 18.
I mean, his age is ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
The fact he's 18 and doing this is crazy. But he looks very, very good, obviously. He looks very, very well-rounded and very few weaknesses to his game, despite the fact he's still a teenager. If you look at his numbers, he looks very, very good in comparison to other central midfielders when it comes to, even very specific things like dribbles and things like that, and creative numbers. Obviously, we've flagged a few times on this show that central midfielders, contrary to popular opinion, I assume, is they're not generally that creative, or they don't score that much either. I know Lampard and Gerrard and Scholes kind of warped the perspective on that sort of type thing, but generally central midfielders do everything kind of in between. But Bellingham, his scoring and his creative numbers, they look very, 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 very good to the extent that, he's impacting his team at both ends of the pitch, really, not just in the middle of the pitch. But one interesting element about this game is in terms of progressive passes, his numbers don't look particularly elaborate. He averages about 3.5, 3.6 progressive passes per 90 over the course of the past year. That places him in the 42nd percentile of midfielders over that period. So maybe his passing isn't. Maybe he's not like a Thiago, that type player, a Rodgers who's going to move the ball from A to B through the lines and things like that. But I think generally looking at what he's like, his profile and his skills and things, he looks the type to me to maybe impose his physical qualities on proceedings a little bit more.
Yeah, and obviously, I suppose you could make a case as well that if you think how Dortmund play, they're going to play fewer of those kind of longer progressive passes because 9 times out of 10 they'll be the ones in possession, facing the team, sitting a little bit deeper, and probably fewer opportunities to have those windows to play those passes. But I agree on the point in terms of maybe being someone who imposes a game more physical from a physical point of view. And I guess before we moved on, Josh, should probably ask if you're of the opinion that you think he'd be a kind of good fit for Liverpool, or someone that Liverpool should go out the way to try and sign.
In terms of the fit and the playing style and things like that, I think he'd be a perfect fit. I think he's very in the Klopp mold, I think, in terms of just the ground he can cover, being very well-rounded, very adaptable, plenty of room to grow and things like that. Obviously, the fact that he's still 18. But then at the same time, I would be very, very surprised if he ends up at Liverpool, just simply because of what he's going to cost. You know, he's English. Dortmund are well known for whenever they sell a major talent, they take the buying club to the cleaners. It's just what they do. They're gonna try and do it with Haaland, I'm assuming, but I think that one's a bit difficult because of the release clause. But they did it with Ousmane Dembele. They did it with Sancho. So when it comes to Bellingham, he's still got a fair few years on his contract. I think his contract's in 2025. So this summer he'll still have another 3 years left on his deal. So I don't think he'll go this summer. I think it'll potentially be the summer after. But then even then, he's probably going for I don't know what you think, maybe 80. Do you think?
Yeah, I think maybe what might keep it to a relatively, in the context, more reasonable fee is that he's a midfielder, and as you said, they don't tend to score a lot of goals, which often, if you think of Haaland, he scores so many goals that'll just bump his price right up. That being said, he would have a huge impact on the team. So for that reason, you'd still be looking at. Well, I'll tell you what, Josh. What's Grealish just gone for?
100, yeah.
So he went for 100, didn't he? I think a difference is, Grealish can play high up the pitch and obviously has more of those raw goals and assist contributions. Maybe Bellingham doesn't have that. So 80 mil is probably a good estimate.
My only thing with him is, although he's obviously very, very good and he's extremely valuable and things like that, my only thing with it is, will Liverpool be able to get a player who offers roughly similar contributions on the pitch for half the price? And I think generally they probably will. Over the course of a decade, probably not. That's the difference with signing Bellingham. The fact you've got him for the decade, you don't have to buy him, But I think generally, if you look at, goal difference and things like that, and the impact Salah has on Liverpool's ability to win at one end of the pitch, and the impact Van Dijk has and Alisson has on Liverpool's ability to win matches at the opposite end of the pitch, with Bellingham playing in the middle, how much of an influence can Bellingham have on Liverpool's ability to score and ability to not concede? Do you get what I mean? When Liverpool are looking at transformational players and they're paying record amounts for Alisson, Van Dijk, potentially Salah getting the biggest contract Liverpool have ever given out. When it comes to Bellingham, who's playing in the middle of the park, it's just a bit. You can get someone else to do roughly similar to what he's going to do for half the price, and I just think Liverpool will do that. But I hope I'm wrong, because I'd love to see him at Anfield. But I just would be amazed that if Liverpool pay, 80 million plus for him, which I think Dortmund will find we'll get from an English club.
Yeah, it's basically match deciding actions are in both boxes, aren't they? So you think of Salah. If you have a Salah, if you have a Salah, his contribution comes in the box or in and around, and it converts into a goal. And same at the other end with Alisson. His contribution is stopping them directly. Theoretically, you'd say Bellingham could be running midfield, the best midfielder by far. He could be putting Liverpool into a position where he can get up to the box. But we've already determined he's not going to be the player that then turns it into a goal. And that just might be the small difference between the fees and, the kind of difference making in terms of goals, points. And that's what we know Liverpool kind of consider over the campaign. There probably would be a ceiling that they wouldn't be prepared to pay, even though he's a fantastic talent for that reason.
Yeah, so we'll have to move on, Dave, and we're already 39 minutes into this recording, apparently. So now, just to move it on a bit quicker, we'll have to be a bit more concise. And when it comes to requests, anyone who's put in 2 requests, just do one of them from now on. So,
okay.
Yeah, Jonathan Tiscott did actually request Jared Bowen, but because you've just had one, mate, and because we're running out of time, we're going to have to skip that one, I think. So we'll move on to Richard Peel, who's requested Ralph Hasenhuttl. I think he referenced in his questions something to do with, the Alpine Klopp type thing, and I suppose could he replace Klopp in the future and things like that. What are your thoughts on Hasenhuttl, Dave?
Yeah, I try and keep it brief. Obviously, you know what? I still think he's a good manager. The only thing, so I think he's a good manager because he has a really good philosophy. He kind of, I think, maximizes what the squad he has. The only thing is, and I don't know if this is more a fault of Southampton's rather than him, is I just don't know if he always does enough, or as a club they do enough to push the needle towards winning more points and matches. They seem to constantly be loitering kind of in that mid-table position, and maybe that's, or lower mid-table, and maybe that's just what'll, unfortunately, this kind of regime or modern Southampton, that's the best he can achieve. But I think when he first come in, one or two might have expected that after a few years down the line, he'd have them kind of pushing top 8, and you'd argue that they're instead more kind of leaning towards bottom 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think he's generally a good coach. I do like him, and I think anyone in the Premier League would start to poach him from Southampton, I wouldn't have much of an issue with it. I'd be interested to see how he gets on, because I do think generally his playing style suits players who are better. I think players who are a bit more capable. But I think he's a good coach. Yeah, I think he's probably at a level above Southampton in my opinion. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a top 10 job in the next couple of seasons potentially. So yeah, go on, mate. You're next, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy for you to run through them if you want, because we might start getting a bit lost as to what we're doing if we're bombing through them. But just I know where we're up to for now, at least, and I feel like a cop out on this one, but I'll be honest with it. Kevin Keegan, and that's from Philip Watling. Now we did obviously open the floor, didn't we, to past players? And I spoke to a few kind of the older fellas. I know both Blues and Reds, but you know what it was like. Back in the day, a lot of Blues would watch Liverpool, and Liverpool fans watch Everton. It's just how it worked, and there was this kind of mutual admiration. So spoke to them about the likes of John Barnes and stuff, but Kevin Keegan, didn't speak to him. Obviously, I never watched them live. I only really knew him as the manager. So I don't know if you've had any more insight off anyone, Josh.
Well, this is a difficult one, really, because he is a player that he was before my time, really. But I do know bits about him. I think he was very, very, very tricky player, very tricky forward. I think he generally played through the middle. But in the modern day, again, I think it's generally interesting to see how they were playing in the modern day. He would probably be in the mould of a Salah or a Mane type, cutting inside from the flanks, finishing. But he was generally just a very unpredictable player with very close control, and really creative and things like that, capable of scoring a few goals and things. So yeah, top player. But again, it was a difficult one because he's a player from the past that I don't know too much about, really.
Yeah,
So
some of the older guys or the older listeners, will be screaming their heads off that we don't know more. But
yeah, it's a shame that data doesn't go back that far, because it'd be
yeah.
nice to delve into some of the numbers. But yeah, we're just dealing with the present, sadly. So yeah, we'll go with Chris Leonard, who's requested Dusan Vlahovic. Popular name in the transfer world as of late, linked strongly with Spurs, and one of the next big things, I suppose, coming out of Serie A.
Yeah. It's doesn't look his age. I think he's only about 2021. I read check
Looks
that
older
actually.
than Lewandowski, doesn't he?
Yeah, but he seems kind of making big waves. Understandable. Fiorentina. I think he scored about 8 goals this season.
On that though, one thing I do know about that is of his 8 goals, I think only 4 are from open play.
There we go. Is that penalties or set piece stuff?
I'm not sure.
Just because I think
I'll have to check now. Hang on.
all it is, I think if obviously he's an attacking asset from set pieces, that's kind of okay. You can kind of
No, it's penalties.
Oh yeah, see that's different, isn't it? That's why we use that same stat pattern, although it isn't technically that, and you want to be able to convert them. If there's a lot on there, that can skew things a little bit. But there's still a lot to like about the player. Whether I'd see him as a Liverpool player, I don't think so. But in terms of being the kind of big profile who looks like the going to do quite well. Career-wise, I think he's definitely that.
Yeah, scored 21 goals last season as well in Serie A, but again, 15 of them went on penalty. So he's benefited from 6 pens there. But yeah, generally looks like he's got a fair bit of potential. Left-footed as well. But I don't know, there's an element of his game where I do look at him and think, is he a bit of a trap? Is he another one of those players who would come to England and just suffer? Basically, I'm not really sure. So plenty of potential and still very, very young. But whether he's ready for England and things like that, all the pressure of leading the line of a top 6 club, I think there's still potentially question marks there. So yeah, I'll keep leading us, Dave. So we'll go towards a man that we know very well, Jonathan David. We have spoken about him in the past, but we've got requests from Mark Weeks and Loic Holoig. I'm not sure if I've pronounced your name right. I'm sure it's French by the looks of it. But yeah, Jonathan David.
Yeah.
To be honest, Jonathan David, Loic probably knows more about David than us because he's, I'm assuming, watching League One every week.
Yeah, you know what I was just about to say. I mean, for those who don't know, we did a kind of transfer special probably about 2 years ago now, and he was a name that we flagged. He looked like a player who kind of had a high ceiling and was doing some interesting stuff. I think he was shown quite similar at the time to like a Firmino, which is why we talked about him. Obviously not a carbon copy, but just in terms of what he could maybe bring as a profile. But to be honest, Josh, I know he's been scoring, but I haven't watched a ton of him at all this year. I haven't really watched a ton of Ligue 1 either. I know that he obviously won the league, didn't he, last year with Lille, who had a really good campaign. I think he's still been scoring this year, 8 for the season. I'll bring the numbers up now. Yeah, scored 8 in 10. So it looks like he's still converting, and he's going on to be the player that kind of predicted 2 years ago that he could be.
Yeah, he does look very, very good. Yeah, he's as you said, he scored 8 goals this season, only 1 penalty, which isn't bad. Over the course of the past few seasons, he's played a lot of football, which generally bodes well for a move to Liverpool. 29 starts last season, 24 the season before, and 21 the season before that. Still only 21, although he's 22 very soon. Reasonably true-footed as well, based on the numbers. And to be honest, his pressure numbers as well look very, very good based on his time at Lille. Yeah, so must be a bit of a presence. I'm not really sure, but don't watch him too much under the new coach. I watched him last season under Galtier a little bit more, but just generally, to be honest, I'm not sure I'll put my neck on the line here, but I think Liverpool might sign this player soon. I think he looks like he's showing a lot. And I think what he could do. This would be the fourth season in a row that he scored over 10 league goals in for a team that isn't a dominant side. He did it for Ghent twice. He's gonna do it for Lille twice. This is removing penalties, and then you look at his age and things like that. So yeah, maybe we can dedicate a bit more time to him further down the line, because if we was to do like a transfers pod for like a summer window or something, he'd probably be close to our lists, wouldn't he? But he looks like he's got bags of potential.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with him was everything else that he brought. And I think said at the time, yeah, he's scoring goals, yeah, that's fine, but it's everything else that he's doing that makes him very interesting from a Liverpool point of view. And he's kind of following that route that was predicted. So yeah, if he did sign, that would be definitely one in the bank for us. But wait and see.
Right, so I'm moving towards favouring names now who've been requested by a few people. So one of the popular names that we got was Conor Gallagher. 3 people. So we had Tahir Iqbal, Scotty Allison, and Stephen Kay all requesting Conor Gallagher. And looking at this season, Dave, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Look, he's been really good. Felt like he drifted under the radar a little bit was it West Brom he was at last year, wasn't it? On loan.
Yeah.
I actually saw him a couple of times, playing for Chelsea's 23s, and he looked a decent player then. But obviously he's kind of stepped up in this really good, or looks like they're going to be a really good Palace side. And funny enough, when we were talking about Bellingham, brought his page up on FB Ref earlier, and Gallagher was shown as one of the similar profiles, which is very interesting.
I spotted that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think generally one of the interesting elements to his game is obviously he's a central midfielder. But he does have, maybe it's a bit of a lazy comparison because of his parent club, but he does seem to have that Lampard element to his game, doesn't he? In terms of his ability to arrive late in the box, sneak a goal and things like that. His expected goals compared to midfielders and his shots compared to midfielders is generally high, despite the fact that he's only playing for Crystal Palace. He's obviously a monster on the defensive side because he just runs all day. I think Thomas Tuchel actually said I think he said something like, if you wake him up first thing in the morning, I think he'll just and ask him to run to the shop or something, he just will. Like he's just permanently on the go. Like he's Giorgio Chiellini, but he's a bit in the Milner mold, isn't he, in terms of that?
Yeah, he hasn't gone permanently, has he, to them?
No. But I do think one of the major differences between Liverpool and Chelsea is if Gallagher was a Liverpool academy graduate, I think he's in the team. I think he's probably at worst, he's probably ahead of like Curtis Jones in the pecking order, but he's without. There's no way Liverpool will loan him out again if he's at Liverpool.
Yeah. No, he's definitely one to keep an eye on this year.
Do you think he's just as a closing remark regarding him? Do you think he makes it to Chelsea or not?
Well, this is the interesting thing. Like, you were saying that Liverpool he plays, but I was thinking, is the issue there that maybe there could be more opportunities to play there? Chelsea, I don't know. Does he make it? I mean, he's still young, isn't he? So he's still young. He's 21, 22 in February. So I think he's got a shot. Yeah, I think he's got a shot.
I think he's good enough. Like,
yeah, we'll see. I guess that I can't add more than that. Then I think he's got a chance.
Yeah. So 2 shouts from Albert Kawangware and Eugene Bukas for John Barnes. I'm sure this, despite your Evertonian background, Dave, and despite this being another player that was before our time, I'm sure you're a little bit more aware of John Barnes.
Yeah. So this was one of the ones I spoke to about, and it's funny that we talk about the Evertonian background. There's a fella that has been going to Everton games all his life, part of my dad's friendship group, very knowledgeable football man. And he's the person I spoke to. I said, could you shed any more light on John Barnes? I said, I know he was always playing for the Nemesis, bit of tongue in cheek, but he said, straight away, he said he was such a talented player. He was so strong, great dribbler. He scored and created a ton of goals. Struggled a little bit to translate that for England, but he said that wasn't necessarily Barnes' fault. But he said it was just unfortunate that after his injuries, he lost his pace a little bit. And obviously his technical ability saw him going to centre midfield, where he still had a decent career, which I'm sure most will remember. But he did say it was a little bit of a shame that he lost his pace, because that was, combined with his technical skill, that made him such a force, and he had to adjust a little bit. But on the whole, he was a great Liverpool player, and understandably one of the greats.
Yeah, I remember him being very keen on the dribble, really inclined to carry the ball over long distances and stuff like that, very direct. Pretty sure he was left-footed as well, I think, which in the modern day probably suggests he played more closer to Salah, whereas I think when he did play, he played on the wing of his preferred foot, which more as a winger than an inside forward. And I think on the back of that, I don't think he ever really scored that often. Looking at FBref, which generally doesn't go back this far, FBref goes back to, the earliest it goes to is Barnes as a 28-year-old. And from 28 years old onwards, the most goals he scored in a single season in the Premier League was 6. Whereas assist-wise, his best assist season was 10. Now, I'm not sure if his peak came before 28 years old, judging by what you just said there about injuries. Probably, maybe it did. But I just remember Barnes being, super unpredictable and very difficult to dispossess. one of them players who did have a similar skill set to what we see now in terms of having the pace, the technical ability, but also specifically the upper body strength to just barge people out the way, basically.
Here's one, and I'm so conscious of time, but is there? I'll put you on the spot, but can you think of a profile now or a player now that you'd compare him to? It's hard, that, isn't it?
On the spot, it's hard. I could probably, I do try to do this generally, but can you?
No, I can't actually. I was thinking maybe initially when I asked the question, Keita coming to me, but I just don't think did the same because I feel like Barnes has a lot more pace and ability to run at plays and around plays, loads of technical skill where, Keita's maybe more a dribble to get away from someone rather than dribbling through people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think he's that dissimilar. This is actually quite weird, but I don't think he's that dissimilar to Harvey Barnes. In terms of having the direct nature, good on the dribble, good strong upper body strength as well. But obviously, Harvey Barnes plays more as an inside forward now, and John Barnes is more of a winger. But yeah, maybe that's one to think about a little bit deeper. So we're gonna go for. I can't not go to this one because this is an important shout. I think if we're going back towards past players, Dave, this is from Chintan Barrow, and his request is just simply R9, the original Ronaldo. I mean, what can you say, Dave?
Yeah, I wonder if it's the same for you, but he was definitely my kind of first footballing hero. I wanted to play like him. I think I had a. Have you ever been abroad on like Spain? Say you go to on holiday to Spain and they have the shops with all of the kind of fake football tops and stuff. I always remember getting the Brazil one with Ronaldo on the back, and I lived in that thing. Absolutely lived in it. Especially like kind of. I think even late 90s. I think around, especially 98 time, loved it. It was just, he was just fantastic. He just seemed to score the same goals over and over again. Kind of running at, doing step overs, round keepers, or slotting into the bottom corner. He was just a master of it. It'd be interesting to watch him now if you could, Josh, relive his whole career and wonder if he's as good as you remember, or there's a little bit of romance behind it. But great name, great player.
Yeah, he was ahead of his time. I think his skill set. He was incredibly agile and very, very fast. Very good at changing direction quickly and things like that. But he was also pretty built. You would bounce off him type thing. I think he was he was a bit like the build of Rooney almost, and also had the pace that Rooney had, but was just very, very technical compared to, much better dribbler than Rooney and things like that. And just very unpredictable, and obviously injuries set him back a little bit. But if you look at his numbers, with him being such a legendary player, FBF do have his numbers of his career. And if you look at his time at Real Madrid, his first season at Real Madrid, he scored 23, then scored 24, then scored 21, and then scored 14. And there's only about, I think, 3 or 4 penalties in there in total for that. When he was at Inter, his first season at Inter as a 20-year-old, and this was when Serie A was pretty strong as well. I think I remember rightly. Scored 25 goals. 19 of those went on penalty, but yeah, one of the legendary players that, if it weren't for injuries, it would have been nice to see the level that he could have reached. But just really special player. Obviously, very, very specific traits when it comes to one-on-ones. He would always go around the keeper, wouldn't he? He was wedded to those the step overs and stuff like that. And you don't see as much of that anymore, to be honest. But yeah, really legendary player, and it's nice to see someone throw his name in, actually. And another legendary player that we can't really skip from Gary Johnson is Gaza, Paul Gascoigne. Obviously, you're a Blue, Dave, so I'm assuming you'll know a bit more about him than me.
Yeah, I was actually obviously privileged for a small while to watch him live, which not many certainly of our age maybe would say that. Some of the older listeners would I imagine would have got the opportunity, or maybe one or two of our listeners abroad probably never got the opportunity either. But yeah, you know, he obviously he arrived at Everton at the tail end of his career a little bit. But there was one game, I think it was it was against maybe a Burnley or a Leyton Orient, and this is when, you know, Burnley were not a Premier League side, but got them in a cup game, and he was unplayable. You know, he was absolutely fantastic, and that was kind of when I realised what the hype was about, because he obviously had a big reputation, but at that time, and you know, you weren't seeing it week in week out because of, you know, where he was at in his career. But he was fantastic that game. Just his technical ability, his way to just drift away from players. You know, when he could kind of run at speed, but with the ball and through plays and dodge challenges, he was fantastic. And obviously over the years, we've now watched a lot of video of him as well. You know, you'll be the same, and he was just a really good technical player. Could put a bit of a maverick. That's probably the best word. A bit of a maverick, but also a bit like burn and desire to win, which I think in those kind of profiles can be the difference sometimes. You spot the players who enjoy doing the kind of exciting stuff, but maybe don't have that desire to win football matches. But he definitely had that. He was a great player.
Yeah, really, really unique player, actually. You know, if you look at his physical abilities, you know, he very, very strong and had a fair bit of pace about him and things like that. Could impose his physical qualities on the game, but then was also just incredibly skillful and very, very good on a dribble for the player, you know, of that era, really. You know, centre midfielder at that era. And he was a bit like him, you know, dribbling wise. I think Zidane had a bit of that about him. You know, he just dribbled a lot more than the typical centre midfielder and that. And but yeah, if you look at Gazan, yeah, I think he occupied parts of a midfield pairing more often than not during those times. But I think if he was using the modern day, if I was in charge of him, if I was in charge of a team, there's no way I'd be using Gazan in the midfield too. I think I'd be using him. Funny enough, I'd probably use him similar to how I would use Pogba, in terms of probably as part of a midfield three, or potentially as a 10, but certainly with, you know, enough coverage so that the license that you have to give him for him to do his thing, you're covered if it, I suppose, doesn't work. But yeah, as you said, Maverick was the word that comes to mind for me. Actually, that's how I describe him as well. So yeah, we'll do one more and then we'll kind of assess. So we'll go to Daniel Agger, Ryan Moss. He's a little bit of a cult hero, Daniel Agger, on Merseyside, Dave.
Well, one half of it definitely. Yeah, he's a strange one. Yeah, was he ever that good, Josh? I always felt like he was a consistent good performer, but I don't think he was like, you know, a Liverpool great standard. But then, you know, am I going to upset a few people by saying that? Did I not watch him closely enough? I don't know.
No, I do think you're right in saying he was a bit weird. I think he was in that mould of a cult hero, and I think one of his biggest qualities was that he got the city. Just what Scousers, I suppose, are generally like, he very much embraced. I think he's got Liverpool tattoos and things like that, and he would put a foot in when needs must. For example, when Liverpool faced Torres for the first time after his move, I think Agger snuck an elbow in there basically, and generally he scored these mad long ranges every now and then from like 30 yards. Looking at his numbers for the seasons, actually, his best scoring return was in 2012/13. He scored 3 goals from centre half. I'm not sure if they were headers or if they were shots from distance, and he was left footed as well. So he was an interesting profile and a player that will go down as a player that Liverpool fans did generally admire very much. But he was injured a lot, so he could never really, you know, stake a claim for a regular performance that Liverpool could build a team around as part of a spine or whatever. But as a player, he's generally fondly remembered in Liverpool, and rightly so in my opinion. So I think at this point we're going to have to stop, even though we've got loads left. We have got loads left. So apologies if we haven't got to you. There's plenty in there, from Eddie Howe to Julian Alvarez to Craig Bellamy to Phil Foden to Phil Neal. There's loads left. So apologies if we haven't got to you. Maybe we can just reuse them when we get the next quiet week or whatever, or if we get a bit of time next week or whatever. So apologies if we haven't got to you. But we'll dedicate a quick 5 minutes to Arsenal, even though it's a match that's big enough to deserve a bit more than that, to be honest.
Yeah, probably could have done close to an hour on this game, but yeah, interesting one. Touched on them briefly last week, but low key they've kind of been one of the Premier League's best sides over the past 2 months. They're undefeated in 8. They've picked up more points than any other side in that time. Admittedly, they haven't the toughest of runs after they've played City, where they obviously, notoriously lost 5-0. But since then, they've just steadied the ship a little bit, and they look like a team who, maybe a little bit more of a difficult proposition than the one you probably would expect it to face a few months ago.
Yeah, I think they're definitely good. I just don't know how good. I'm finding it hard to gauge just where they're going to finish at the end of the season. Like, they don't seem particularly free-flowing when it comes to finding the net. And obviously we know that generally the amount of goals that you score equates to the amount of points that you end up with. So if they're not going to score more than 60 goals or more than 70 goals or whatever, they're probably not going to have anything special in terms of the season. But I do think they're generally moving in the right direction finally. Obviously it took a while. But I think the recruitment over the summer is interesting, actually, because on the face of it, I didn't think it was that great. But I think it just sums up how you can't really judge recruitments until you see how the players are going to be used and what the plan is. And I think Ben White has came in and made a bit of a difference. Looks like a solid performer, and he's going to be available every week. Nuno Tavares looks very, very good. Really, really, bags of potential as a left back. Sammy Lokonga looks good. Captain of Anderlecht when he arrived, and Xhaka ended up missing a few games like they predicted, and they've got Lokonga to come in and just do the same job. So I think generally, and he's obviously brought Smith-Rowe and Saka through and made them, key cogs in the team. So I think generally they are moving in the right direction. I think now, finally, they've done all the cleansing, and they're now in a position where they can now build. I think they're not having to, sweep up the mistakes of past regimes or whatever anymore. So I do, of all the games Liverpool have played against Arsenal, probably since we've started recording this podcast, this is probably the most capable Arsenal team Liverpool have faced.
Yeah. And you mentioned one of them there. It'd be interesting to see. Would you, if you were that in the Arsenal camp, would you play Tavares? Bear in mind he's up against Salah, or would you be inclined to go back to Tierney, who's obviously available now?
Well, we recorded Analysing Arsenal the other week with Tom Canton, and he asked me that. He asked me that, and I found it tough, to be honest. I didn't know what to say. I think I would probably stick with Tavares, simply because I think he's more of a physical specimen, if you like, than Tierney, even though Tierney's very good in that department. And I think he's got more of a flow to his game now because he's been playing every week. Whereas Tierney stops starting. When that's the case and you're putting him against the best player in the league at the minute, could be a bit tricky. But I rate Tavares quite highly.
And maybe this is, from a Liverpool perspective, obviously being on the Liverpool podcast, maybe this is one thing that people should be looking out for. That could kind of be a perfect matchup. It's going to be a little bit of a selection headache for Arsenal. And there's kind of pros and cons to each, and maybe that's something Liverpool get to take advantage of, especially given the form Salah's in.
Yeah, I mean, we could look at the numbers a little bit more, but one thing with the numbers, because of Arsenal's terrible start, it feels like they don't entirely paint them in a proper picture, really. They're currently 7th in the league so far for shots, and in terms of shots faced, They are just after mid-table. So, again, they don't look that great, but they got hammered by Manchester City, and even Brentford give them a game. But I do think, if we're looking at it from a Liverpool perspective, I do still think, specifically at Anfield, I do think Liverpool will have too much. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how the likes of Smith-Rowe and players who seem to be in form for Arsenal, how they cope and how they step up against this side.
Yeah, I agree. I also think Liverpool have too much because I have caught a few games in this unbeaten run, and they have looked a little bit fortunate at times. I thought they were not well beaten because obviously it finished goalless, but from a performance perspective, I thought they was comfortably second best against Brighton, one or two other games like that. So
Yeah,
maybe a little bit fortunate.
Yeah, I was going to say I thought they were second best against Palace. Against Leicester, they were very good though. So it's going to be interesting to see how they get on. But they are unbeaten in 10 in all competitions. So predictions on this one, Dave?
Yeah, I'll still go with a Liverpool 2-0 win.
I'm going to say Liverpool 3-1 on this one, I think. But yeah, we're going to round up there. This is, I think, probably our longest pod ever. So apologies for that one. Mind you, hopefully the listeners will like it.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us, Dave.
Thank you, mate. Cheers.
Yeah, and we'll be back next week to analyse what happened at Arsenal and to look ahead to the weekend's fixtures. So yeah, thanks for tuning in.